Unaware his wife just signed a $1 billion oil deal, he refused to pay hospital bills for her and their baby. What happened next will shock you. He didn't just abandon her once. He abandoned her twice, first in a hospital room, and later in a courtroom that would write the end of his life as he knew it. By the time the courtroom went silent, by the time the judge stripped Mark Carter of custody, approved financial penalties, and referred his behavior for criminal investigation, Mark still didn't fully grasp what he'd done. Because long before the court, long before the divorce papers, long before his public collapse, he made his cruelest decision while his wife was lying in a hospital bed. While Evelyn lay exhausted, stitched, and barely conscious after childbirth, while their newborn son cried under warm lights in the nursery, Mark stood at a window, glanced at an email from the hospital billing system, and told the administrator and social worker 2 words that would be documented, time-stamped, and played back in court. Then don't. Don't sign the authorization. Don't take responsibility. Don't pay. He refused to approve the bill. He refused to sign as guarantor. He refused to sign, even when told the baby might not be discharged without a clear way to pay. Hospital policy meant emergency care continued, of course. Doctors and nurses still did their jobs. But those 2 words triggered something else. Reports, notes, incident forms, and a quiet call to a hospital social worker who started a file with his name on it. What Mark didn't know, what he never bothered to ask, was that just hours earlier, the woman he dismissed as not working anymore had quietly signed a $1 billion offshore oil acquisition in her own name, protected by layers of corporate entities, lawyers, escrow, and confidentiality agreements. He thought she was dependent. He thought silence meant weakness. He thought cruelty would cost him nothing. While he joked with another woman in the hallway, while he snapped at Evelyn for embarrassing him, by reaching for her phone, his wife was learning something far more dangerous than anger. She was learning how exposed he really was. What followed wasn't screaming, wasn't chaos, wasn't a dramatic confrontation in the hospital. It was paperwork, audio recordings, hospital notes, time-stamped emails, court dates. And one by one, everything Mark believed made him powerful. His marriage, his image, his control collapsed in public. Because the woman he humiliated at her weakest moment didn't fight back the way he expected. She waited. She documented. She moved when the law, not emotion, was on her side. And when the truth finally surfaced, it didn't just shock him, it erased him. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you watch without subscribing, it's like letting her silence be mistaken for weakness again. When you subscribe, you stand with every woman who was underestimated, every child protected by courage, and every quiet mind that chose strategy over despair. Please subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. The room was silent in a way that felt heavy, almost dangerous. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of power settling into place. Evelyn Carter, 32 years old and visibly pregnant, sat at the center of a long glass table inside a private conference room high above the city skyline. The walls were transparent, but the world outside felt distant, blurred, unimportant. Inside this room, only ink mattered, only timing, only truths that hadn't yet reached the headlines. In front of her lay a stack of documents thick enough to shift entire portfolios. At the top, Final Acquisition Agreement Offshore Energy Holdings. Valuation, $1 billion. Evelyn picked up the pen. Her hand did not tremble. Across from her sat Mr. Halvorsen, late 50s, silver-haired, chairman of one of the most influential oil consortiums in the industry. He had built empires, watched men crumble, and learned to recognize real authority even when it arrived in a plain blazer and low heels. To his left and right sat 2 senior board attorneys, sharp-eyed, disciplined, paid to spot trouble before it matured into disaster. Near the wall stood a corporate secretary, already preparing to notarize history. No one smiled. No champagne. No press. This wasn't a celebration. It was a transfer of leverage. Evelyn signed the final page. The pen lifted. Ink dried. $1 billion moved into a structure she controlled without applause. Her phone, screen down beside the folder, buzzed once. She briefly turned it over. A missed call from Mark, and a text. Doctor said you should be on the couch, not in a meeting. Are you still resting? The wallpaper behind the notification was an old photo, Mark's arm around her waist, both of them smiling in a cramped apartment years ago when promises still felt permanent. Back then, Mark was an ambitious 36-year-old with more ideas than money. He had always liked the word provider. He liked it even more once Evelyn started saying she was taking a step back from work and stopped putting her name on anything public. He never asked what she did with her days after that. He assumed. Mr. Halvorsen cleared his throat, his voice low but respectful. You understand, he said, that if your name were public on this, you'd make every finance headline in 48 hours. Evelyn closed the folder gently, as if sealing something alive inside it. Headlines make noise, she replied. I prefer structure. The chairman studied her for a long second. Men begged to be associated with a deal like this. She had insisted on anonymity, shell companies, escrow, NDAs. What no one in the room said aloud, but all of them understood, was that Evelyn Carter did not just negotiate deals. She designed systems. Years earlier, she'd been a junior analyst at a mid-sized energy firm, sitting quietly at the far end of tables like this one, often the youngest, usually the only woman, ignored until something went wrong. She watched senior executives reuse her projections without credit. She listened to her ideas, repeated louder by someone else. That's when she learned. Visibility wasn't the same as power. Power works best when nobody realizes where it's coming from. That lesson came from her father. He'd owned a modest but profitable energy logistics company, nothing flashy, but ruthlessly organized. Before he died, he left her more than shares. He left her a sentence she heard in her head every time she hesitated. If they don't know what you're worth, they can't take it from you. After his death, she quietly folded his company into larger structures, reinvested carefully, and never tied her net worth to her personal name. What she controlled sat in holding companies. What she just signed today sat in escrow, locked until regulatory filings cleared. She could not touch the money yet. She did not need to. Mr. Halvorsen slid a final sheet across the table. Our legal team files with regulators today. Until confirmation, confidentiality is absolute. Evelyn nodded. I understand. The secretary stepped forward to notarize. The attorneys stacked their copies. The meeting ended the way it began, without noise. Evelyn stood. As she did, a faint tightening rolled across her lower abdomen. Not sharp, just enough to make her press her palm briefly against the edge of the table. First baby? The secretary asked quietly, noticing the gesture. Evelyn gave a small smile. Yes. Keep your phone on, the woman said. Babies and deals like to compete for attention. Evelyn's phone buzzed again as if on cue. Another message from Mark. Call me when you wake up. I'm grabbing coffee before a meeting. He truly believed she was at home, resting. She had let him believe that for months. It made his ego calmer, his shoulders straighter. She had thought it cost her nothing. She slid the phone into her bag without replying. Not because she was hiding, but because somewhere beneath her ribs, a feeling stirred that timing was about to matter more than any explanation. She walked toward the elevator, heels clicking against polished stone. In the mirrored doors, her reflection appeared not as a wife, not as a supportive partner, but as a woman standing alone with quiet authority. Behind her, a billion-dollar contract lay sealed in a folder. Ahead of her, the first real contraction tightened around her middle. And somewhere across town, Mark Carter was already behaving like a man who assumed he still controlled everything, never realizing how expensive his ignorance was about to become. The pain hit harder this time. A sharp wave tore through Evelyn's body, stealing her breath and forcing her fingers to claw into the thin hospital sheets. She inhaled through clenched teeth, exhaled slowly, doing exactly what the midwife had told her hours earlier. This one's stronger, she whispered. It had been a long day. Morning, billion-dollar signatures. Afternoon, tightening cramps that refused to calm down. Evening, her obstetrician, unimpressed with her "I'm fine," ordering her straight to the hospital. Mark had driven, complaining about traffic the entire way. Now, in a bright labor and delivery room, Mark was pacing, not beside her bed, near the door. He was 36, fit, in an expensive shirt that still smelled faintly of cologne. His phone was pressed to his ear like it was the most important thing in the room. Yeah, I know, he muttered, turning slightly toward the window. I told you, Lena. I'll call you later. The name landed in the air like a dropped glass. Too casual, too familiar. Evelyn heard it. She didn't turn her head. She didn't ask, who's Lena? She focused on her breathing and stared at the ceiling, letting the contraction crest and fade. Mark lowered his voice. I'm at the hospital. No, not for me. The baby. Look, this isn't the time to talk numbers. A beat of silence while Lena answered. Mark's jaw tightened. I'll handle it, he snapped. Just don't do anything until we talk. He ended the call and slid the phone into his pocket, running a hand through his hair. His eyes flicked to Evelyn, then away, like looking too long might obligate him to something he wasn't ready to give. Another contraction rolled in. Evelyn closed her eyes. Memories surfaced like photographs. Mark in their first apartment, excited and terrified about a small startup loan, her quietly moving money from her own investments into his business account, telling him it was from a bonus, him joking one night, half serious, I don't want my wife out earning me. I need to feel like the provider. She had smiled then, tracing circles on his wrist. Then I'll make sure you never feel small. Back then, it had sounded romantic. Later, it became a habit, turning down a visible promotion, downplaying what she actually understood about the industry, packaging every suggestion as a question so he wouldn't feel threatened. She thought she was protecting the marriage. In reality, she was building a cage for herself. A knock at the door pulled her back. A nurse in her 40s stepped in, badge reading Nurse Patel, expression warm but focused. She checked the monitor, adjusted an IV, and smiled briefly at Evelyn. You're progressing, she said. We'll likely admit you fully to labor and delivery now. She turned to Mark, professional tone clicking in. Sir, we'll need to confirm your insurance information and get your authorization for admission and postnatal care. We've sent an estimate to your phone and email. We can also discuss payment plans with our financial counselor if needed. Mark stiffened, the word payment snagging on nerves already frayed. Right now? He asked. Yes, Nurse Patel replied gently. We continue emergency care regardless, of course, but for the private room, extended stay, and newborn care after discharge, we need someone documented as financially responsible. Evelyn watched him from the corner of her eye. He pulled his phone out again, thumb tapping the screen a little too hard. A notification from the hospital billing portal glowed up at him. Projected charges, labor, delivery, postnatal care, newborn stay. The number made his mouth flatten. Another contraction caught Evelyn, longer and deeper. She exhaled slowly, letting the nurse coach her through it. Mark didn't move toward her. His eyes were glued to the estimate. The pause that followed wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was calculation. Nurse Patel waited patiently, tablet in hand, used to awkward conversations about money, but rarely with someone dressed this well. Sir, she prompted, do you want us to pre-authorize now, or would you prefer to speak with our financial counselor first? Evelyn opened her eyes fully and looked at Mark. She didn't speak, didn't plead, didn't remind him that this was their child. She simply watched. Because after years of cushioning him from discomfort, for the first time, she wanted to see what he did when nobody rescued him. Mark glanced at the estimate again, then at the door, then at his phone like it might offer a way out. Lena's words from earlier replayed in his head. Don't let her trap you financially. He inhaled sharply, eyes flicking anywhere but his wife. Give me a minute, he said to the nurse. Nurse Patel nodded, professional and calm. Of course. I'll let the desk know you're reviewing the estimate. She left the room quietly. Evelyn's contraction ended. The monitor beeped in a steady rhythm. Mark slipped his phone back into his pocket and walked toward the hallway, shoulders tight. He told himself he was just getting air. He told himself he'd decide after one more call. Evelyn stared at the closed door. Whatever he chose next, she knew, would be more honest than any love speech he'd ever given her. The hallway hummed with quiet urgency, wheels rolling, doors opening and closing, low voices sliding under the fluorescent lights. Mark leaned against the wall beside a fire extinguisher, as far from the nurse's station as possible while still getting signal. His chest felt tight, not from worry for Evelyn, but from the hospital estimate still glowing in his memory. He pulled out his phone and called Lena back. She picked up on the second ring. Tell me you at least stepped outside, she said, voice smooth, the faint echo of a bar or office behind her. I'm in the hallway, Mark replied, lowering his voice automatically. They just sent me the numbers. He rattled off the figure. Lena whistled softly. That's not small. Yeah, no kidding. he snapped. My cash flow's already stretched. The investor backed out last week, remember? Payroll's due Monday. Lena knew all of this. She handled the marketing for his company, and somewhere along the line, started handling his ego too. She'd listened to every complaint about pressure, expectations, and how Evelyn had decided to stop working. A baby changes everything, Lena said, but her tone wasn't sentimental. Once that kid is here, you're locked into 18 years minimum. School, medical, extra everything. If you sign for everything now, you're telling everyone you'll carry the whole thing forever. She doesn't have income, Mark said, pacing slowly. She left the firm last year. Said she wanted to focus on family. She barely checks emails anymore. He conveniently forgot how many of those family decisions had been driven by his insecurities. Exactly, Lena replied. So why are you the only adult in the room expected to think long-term? He bristled. She's the one having the baby. And you're the one they're asking to sign your name to every bill on that ward, Lena countered. I'm not saying don't take care of your kid. I'm saying don't sign away leverage blindly. Make her show she can contribute. 2. Set conditions. Otherwise, you're nothing but a walking card machine. Mark stared through the narrow window at the lights of the parking lot below. She'll understand, he muttered. She always does. That's because you trained her to, Lena said softly. The words should have bothered him. Instead, they made him feel in control again. He pictured Evelyn at home like he'd always imagined her lately, reading baby blogs, watching daytime TV, between projects, waiting for him to make decisions. He had no picture in his head of her at a conference room table that morning, signing documents that would dwarf every number he'd ever seen. He didn't know that woman existed. Just, don't rush, Lena continued. Tell them you'll arrange something later. Make it clear you're not an open checkbook. If she needs something, she can figure it out too. Mark nodded, even though she couldn't see him. This isn't about you, he said, his conscience pricking just enough to protest. Lena laughed quietly. Of course it's about you. You're the one who has to live with whatever you sign. Call me when you're done playing hero. She hung up before he could answer. Mark stood there for a second, phone still against his ear, even though the line had gone dead. Then he opened the email from the hospital again. Estimated charges. Approve, decline, request counselor. His thumb hovered over approve. He imagined Lena's voice. Don't let her trap you financially. He imagined Evelyn's quiet compliance over the years. Had she ever told him no? Really no? For a brief moment, he pictured going back into the room, taking her hand, saying something like, we'll figure it out. Then he thought about payroll, rent for the office. The failed expansion he hadn't admitted was failing. He convinced himself this was about being responsible. He locked his phone, slipped it into his pocket, and pushed off the wall. As he walked back toward the room, he passed a sign pointing toward billing and patient financial services. He followed it. He had a decision to deliver. The baby cried before anyone spoke. It was a thin, uncertain sound, but it filled the room more completely than any argument could. Evelyn lay propped up in the hospital bed, arms shaky but steady as she held her son against her chest. Warmth, weight, and a smell she knew would be burned into her memory forever. Her hair clung damply to her forehead. Her body ached in deep, unfamiliar ways. But for one suspended moment, everything was just here, alive, enough. The door opened quietly. A woman stepped in, mid-40s, neat bun, badge reading billing administrator Miss Reynolds. Beside her walked another woman in a cardigan with a clipboard, badge reading hospital social worker Miss Diaz. Behind them was a younger nurse from the nursery, hands folded, eyes soft. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, Miss Reynolds began. I'm sorry to disturb you. I'll keep this brief. Mark stood at the window, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed on the parking lot below, like there was something there more interesting than his son's tiny fingers curling and uncurling against Evelyn's gown. What's the problem? He asked without turning. Miss Reynolds cleared her throat. We've received your initial review of the estimate, Mr. Carter. Our records show you declined pre-authorization for postnatal and newborn care. Evelyn's head lifted slightly. Declined? She glanced at Mark. He finally turned, expression tight. I told them I wasn't signing anything until we discussed options. Miss Reynolds kept her tone neutral. To be clear, all emergency and medically necessary care continues regardless. Your son is receiving appropriate care. However, without a documented guarantor, we're required to place an administrative hold on discharge and involve our social work team. The nursery nurse stepped in gently. It just means he'll stay in the nursery until we're sure there's a safe discharge plan and someone legally responsible. It's policy when there's a refusal. The words landed heavier than their calm delivery. Evelyn adjusted her hold on the baby, instinctively drawing him closer. I don't understand. We're here. We're his parents. And we want that documented with a responsible party for the bill, Miss Reynolds said carefully. You have options: insurance, payment plans, financial assistance. But we do need someone to sign. She turned slightly toward Mark, tablet in hand. Mr. Carter, do you want to update your decision? Mark exhaled sharply through his nose. I already told the counselor, he said. We're not authorizing anything new right now. She, he jerked his chin toward Evelyn, has contacts, family, whatever. She can figure it out if she wants extra days in private rooms. The nurse shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn felt something inside her go very, very still. She reached toward the bedside table for her phone with one hand, the baby cradled in the other. The movement was slow, painful. Mark's eyes snapped to the gesture. Don't, he snapped. Don't start calling your old colleagues or your dad's friends begging for loans. It's humiliating. Evelyn paused with the phone in her hand. Humiliating. She unlocked it anyway. Her banking app showed cold numbers, investment accounts, corporate entities, the escrow listing for the deal she'd signed that morning, funds visible but locked by legal agreements until filings cleared, untouchable for now. She had other liquid assets, but any sudden large transfer today would trigger questions from compliance teams she didn't want involved yet. The money wasn't the problem. The truth was, if she bailed Mark out silently again, the pattern would continue. He'd walk out believing there were no consequences to his choices. She closed the app, didn't show him, didn't explain. Mrs. Carter, Miss, Reynolds said gently, you're also allowed to sign as guarantor if you prefer, regardless of your employment status. Evelyn met her eyes. In a few days, I'll settle everything, she said evenly. Today, I just need to know my son is safe and cared for. He is, the nursery nurse assured her. We're not withholding care. This is about documentation. Mark scoffed. So what? You're holding the baby hostage over paperwork? Over legal responsibility? Miss, Reynolds corrected, still calm. Sir, we're asking again. Will you authorize payment as the primary guarantor? Mark's jaw tensed. He glanced at Evelyn, sweaty, exhausted, stitches pulling when she moved. In his mind, she was the one who had stepped back from the world. He was the one out there fighting. No, he said finally. Not right now. I said what I said. He looked directly at Miss Reynolds. Then don't, he added. Don't add anything else under my name until we've sorted things out. If there isn't a clear way to pay, he added with a shrug, then don't discharge him yet either. Keep him there until it's sorted. I'm not signing for any of this. Miss Reynolds' stylist paused for a fraction of a second. Then she tapped, documenting his refusal. Understood, she said quietly. I'm required to inform you that this conversation is being documented in your file. Social work and, if necessary, child welfare will be notified to assist with discharge planning. She turned to Evelyn, her professional mask softening. We'll take your son to the nursery for observation for now. Once the paperwork is settled, he can room in with you again. Evelyn nodded once. Her arms tightened unwillingly as the nurse stepped closer. I'll bring him back as soon as I can, the nurse whispered. Evelyn nodded again. She didn't trust her voice. The baby left her arms, and the absence was immediate warmth gone, weight gone, a hollow space where he'd been. Mark was already reaching for his phone, conversation over in his mind. Evelyn watched the door as it closed behind the nurse and her child. Her father's voice drifted back to her, calm and merciless. People tell you who they are when there's something real at stake. Believe them the first time. She laid the phone on her lap, screen up this time. She had every tool she needed. Dates, times, names, witnesses. And for the first time in 7 years, she had no desire to protect Mark from the consequences of his own decisions. He thought this was about money. He thought saying, then don't, ended the conversation. He didn't realize he'd just opened a case. The soft click of the door closing sounded louder than it should have. Night had slipped in almost without her noticing. The room was dim now, lit only by the glow of the monitor, tracking her vitals and the small lamp near the sink. The spot on her chest where Noah had slept still felt warm, ghost-heavy. Evelyn stared at the ceiling. She replayed the scene again, but slower this time. "Miss," Reynolds' steady voice. The nurse's apologetic eyes. Mark's shrug. "Then don't." The words no longer sounded like a momentary lapse. They sounded like a verdict. She turned her head toward the door. Through the small pane of glass, she could see a security officer posted at the end of the hall standard protocol whenever social work flagged a file for custody tension or financial dispute. He wasn't there for her. He was there because someone had documented that the baby's father had refused responsibility. Evelyn shifted carefully, biting back a wince as stitches pulled. She reached for her phone on the tray table and unlocked it. Instead of opening her banking app this time, she opened a contact she hadn't used since before she got married. Carter and Doyle Family Law. Saved under a boring label years ago when her father's estate went through probate. She'd kept the number updated out of habit. Not because she thought she'd ever need it like this. She pressed call. The line picked up after one ring. "Carter and Doyle." A calm voice answered. "This is Amanda Carter." "Hi, Amanda. It's Evelyn." Evelyn Carter, formerly Evelyn Rios, from the Rios Energy Estate. The tone on the other end sharpened instantly, shifting from polite to fully present. "Evelyn," Amanda said. "Are you all right?" Evelyn glanced at the empty bassinet. "I just had a baby," she said. "They've taken him to the nursery. My husband refused to sign authorization for the bills. The hospital has documented it and said social work may involve child services if it isn't resolved." Amanda was quiet for half a beat, not shocked, calculating. "Do you feel physically safe?" she asked. "Yes," Evelyn said. "But I don't feel protected. Not by him." "Understood," Amanda replied. "Listen carefully. Right now, do nothing confrontational. Cooperate with hospital staff. Let them document everything. I'll send you a secure link. Forward any emails you've received from the hospital and write down names and times while they're fresh." A notification appeared almost immediately. Evelyn opened the secure portal and started uploading screenshots. "The deal we talked about last year?" Evelyn added quietly. "The acquisition is done. The funds are in escrow. My corporate structure is clean and separate. That gives us options," Amanda said. "We'll keep your assets ring-fenced. For now, our priority is your son and your safety. Once you're discharged, we'll file for temporary measures, custody, financial protection, whatever we need." Evelyn swallowed, throat tight but voice steady. "There's something else." She turned her head slightly, angling the phone so she could see down the hallway. A few doors away, near the nurse's station, Mark stood in profile, laughing. Beside him, in fitted slacks and a blazer, was Lena. She held a takeaway coffee in one hand, her other hand briefly touching his arm as she smiled up at him. To anyone else, they looked like colleagues or friends. Evelyn knew better. "They're here together," she said quietly. He called her. "She brought him coffee while our baby is in the nursery, and social work is opening a file." Amanda didn't gasp. She didn't curse. She just absorbed. "Good," the lawyer said. "That means hospital staff have seen them together. Another pattern, another piece of context. What do I do?" Evelyn asked. "For tonight?" Amanda replied. "You rest. Answer questions honestly. Don't argue. Don't threaten divorce. Let him think you're too tired to react. I'll start paperwork first thing. We'll request hospital records, social work notes, the billing refusal, and any incident reports. When we move with everything." Evelyn nodded, even though Amanda couldn't see her. "And my son?" she whispered. "The hospital will not withhold medically necessary care," Amanda said firmly. "Their file on your husband will do more for you than any speech you could give him tonight. Tomorrow, once I've spoken to their legal department, you'll authorize whatever needs to be authorized yourself. You can afford it. And we will make sure the court sees that you could, even when he pretended you couldn't." Evelyn exhaled slowly, some of the tightness in her chest loosening not because things were okay, but because there was finally a path. "They think you're dependent," Amanda added. "For the moment, let them keep thinking that. I can do that," Evelyn said. "Good," Amanda replied. "Then sleep if you can. From this moment on, we document. You don't have to raise your voice. The paperwork will." They ended the call. Outside, Mark said something that made Lena laugh again. A nurse walked past them carrying a chart, glancing at them briefly, taking in more than she'd ever say aloud. Evelyn watched for another second. Then she turned her head away from the window, closed her eyes, and let the monitor's soft beeping lull her into something that wasn't quite sleep, but wasn't raw shock anymore either. The moment he refused to pay, he hadn't set a boundary. He'd handed her the clearest evidence she would ever get of who he really was when it cost him something. She didn't need a fight. She had witnesses. She had records. She had patience. Silence, she realized, was not surrender. It was strategy. And by the time Mark understood that, it would be far too late. The first document hit the table with a flat, decisive sound. Evelyn didn't flinch. It had been 5 days since she'd left the hospital with Noah, in a carrier in a thick envelope of discharge papers, and a copy of the hospital's incident summary she'd requested and signed for on the way out. Now she sat in a quiet conference room at Carter & Doyle, the same firm that had handled her father's estate. The city hummed somewhere beyond the tinted windows, but in here, everything was still. Across from her sat Amanda Carter, late 40s, sharp-eyed, composed. Beside Amanda sat a man in his early 50s. Reed, private investigator, former law enforcement. His clothes were simple. His presence wasn't. On the table lay a growing stack of papers and a black tablet. Amanda tapped the top page. Hospital Incident Report, she said, filed by Billing Administrator Reynolds, co-signed by Nurse Patel, and referenced in the social worker's internal note. We also requested their final billing ledger, Amanda went on. It shows the entire balance was paid in full from one of your holding companies 3 days after discharge. That matters. It proves your son was never actually left without care or payment, only that his father refused to be responsible. Evelyn leaned forward just enough to read the bolded line. Spouse refused to authorize payment. Direct quote. Then don't. Beneath it, date, time, staff present. Her fingers pressed lightly into the table edge. Reed slid another sheet toward her. This is the follow-up from the hospital social work department, he said. They documented that staff expressed concern about your emotional state and your husband's refusal. They flagged it as a risk factor for discharge planning. Amanda's expression stayed neutral. The key point, she added, is that this isn't your word against his. Multiple employees, in writing, all describing the same thing. Evelyn nodded once. Reed reached into his folder again. Next, he said. Server logs. He turned the tablet toward her. Your husband's email shows he opened the hospital estimate and the authorization portal before the refusal. Reed continued. They provided us the access log under your written authorization. They can't share his account content, but they can confirm the timestamps. On the screen. Time, 1743, estimate email opened. Time, 1745. Authorization portal open. Time, 1749. Authorization declined. Amanda leaned back slightly. So he wasn't confused? He reviewed and then refused. Evelyn's jaw flexed once. He had money, she said quietly. Not a lot, but enough for the initial bills. Reed nodded and slid a thin stack of bank statements forward. We pulled what we legally can at this stage, he said. His business account had enough to cover the hospital's initial requirements. It would have hurt him, but it wouldn't have destroyed him. Evelyn studied the highlighted lines, deposits, withdrawals, balances. So he chose not to use it, she said. Yes, Amanda replied, and that choice matters. Reed tapped another folder. We also have the audio from your husband's call with the hospital's financial counselor, Reed said, tapping the tablet. They record those calls for quality and compliance. With your authorization and our subpoena notice, they release the segment where he confirms he understands the options and still refuses. Now for Lena. Evelyn's eyes lifted. We forensically imaged the shared home computer you authorized us to access, Reed continued. Your husband's messages sync to a desktop app. He never turned off the backup. He spread out printed screenshots, clean, with timestamps. Lena, don't let her trap you financially. Mark, she doesn't even work anymore. Lena, make her show she can contribute. Don't sign everything. Evelyn let the words sit in front of her without reacting. Amanda read them, then exhaled slowly. This shows influence, she said. Not a defense, but context. He was warned about financial traps and chose to interpret his own wife and child as the trap. Reed placed another item on the table, a set of printed photos. Mark entering a hotel 2 nights after Noah's birth. Mark leaving 3 hours later. Lena beside him, her coat open, their body language too familiar to mistake. Taken after he left visiting hours early, Reed said. Timestamps line up with hospital sign-out logs. Evelyn swallowed once. It wasn't the affair that stung. She'd suspected something the first time she heard Lena's name in the delivery room. It was the timing, the sequence. Refuse to sign, leave, go to dinner with someone else. Amanda gathered papers into a neat stack. So, she said, we have written hospital documentation of his refusal, social work notes expressing concern, system logs showing he reviewed and declined, text messages showing premeditated reluctance to support you financially, images that demonstrate where his priorities went immediately afterward. Evelyn looked up. Is it enough? For what we're going to ask the court? Amanda replied. Yes, especially combined with your own financial position. She slid a different folder forward, one stamped with corporate logos and seals. This, Amanda said, is everything you sent from the acquisition this week. Escrow documents, board approvals, valuation summaries, your position as beneficial owner. I've already arranged for the more sensitive parts to be filed under seal. Reed glanced between them. He still doesn't know? He asked. No, Evelyn said. As far as he's concerned, I'm a stay-at-home wife who used to be good with numbers. Amanda's mouth tightened just enough to betray opinion. Good, she said. Let him keep believing that for now. We're going to file for divorce, temporary sole custody, and a restraining order on marital asset transfers. We'll argue that he's a financial risk and a neglectful caregiver. Evelyn's eyes flicked to the stack of evidence. What if he tries to apologize? She asked quietly. What if he suddenly offers to pay for everything and show up? Then, Amanda said, he's admitting he knew what mattered and simply chose not to act until there were consequences. Courts pay more attention to what people do when nobody's watching. Reed stood, collecting some of his notes. He's not going to stop, he said matter-of-factly. Guys like him rarely do. Once he feels cornered, he'll send texts, make calls, maybe even say things that help us. I'll keep monitoring what we can legally monitor. Amanda nodded. You don't confront him. You don't warn him. You don't threaten him with court. You respond through us only. That way, every desperate move he makes goes straight into the file. Evelyn sat back slowly. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel destroyed either. She felt aligned. As if the outside record finally matched the reality she'd been silently living. Amanda closed the main folder and placed it in front of her. When we move, the lawyer said, it will be public. There's no halfway version of this. You understand that, yes? Evelyn held her gaze. I understand. She rose, gathering the folder carefully. Her fingers brushed the hospital report one more time, the line, then don't, still visible through the translucent cover. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware. And somewhere across town, Mark Carter was still switching between texts and meetings. Walking through his days as if nothing had changed, not realizing that every step he took now was being measured against a record that no longer needed his permission to exist. The file was closed. The case, however, was just starting to unfold. 2 weeks later, laughter rose around Mark Carter, just as his world quietly shifted. He stood near the center of a polished event hall, drink in hand, retelling for the third time how he'd navigated a tough quarter and managed cash flow like a pro. The people around him, small investors, other founders, a few local executives nodded, half listening, more interested in being near confidence than verifying competence. Mark thrived in rooms like this. He did not see the woman in the dark blazer until she stopped directly in front of him. Mark Carter? She asked. Her voice was clear, professional, practiced. She carried a slim leather folder. Her expression was neutral, not hostile. Mark turned, still smiling. Yeah, that's me. He expected a business card, a compliment, a request to connect. Instead, she opened the folder. My name is Angela Perez, she said. I'm a process server. You are being served with a divorce petition and accompanying motions for temporary custody and financial orders. The words sliced through the noise. The closest circle fell silent first. Conversations stalled mid-sentence. Someone's glass clinked softly against the table, suddenly too loud. Mark blinked once, then laughed, the sound sharp and off-key. This is someone's mixed something up, he said. You've got the wrong guy. Angela didn't argue. She held out the folder. You've been properly identified. Service is complete. His fingers closed around the documents automatically. Nearby, one of the event organizers signaled discreetly to venue security. Two guards shifted position, not closing in, just watching. Not for violence, for embarrassment. Mark's neck felt hot. What is this? He muttered, flipping through the first pages too fast to understand. Legal phrases flashed past his eyes. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Motion for temporary sole, legal and physical custody. Request for temporary orders restraining dissipation of marital assets. And that phrase, based in part on documented medical abandonment and financial neglect. His chest tightened. Behind him, someone whispered, "Is that Evelyn?" Another voice. "Did he get served at an event?" Mark snapped the folder shut. Across the room, at the edge of the bar area, Lena stood frozen mid-sip. Her eyes met his for a split second wide, assessing, and then, almost imperceptibly, she stepped back. Distance. "Did you know about this?" he demanded, taking an involuntary step toward her. Lena's lips parted, but no answer came. Instead, her gaze flicked sideways, scanning who was watching, where the nearest exit was, which conversations had already changed tone. The process server glanced at her watch. "All future communication can go through your attorney," she said, tone still polite. Then she turned and left. Mark's phone buzzed in his pocket. A new email from his office bank, an automatic alert. Notice, legal documents received referencing account. He ignored it. He shoved his way to the edge of the group and out a side door onto a small balcony, air cooler but not calming. He opened the folder again, more carefully this time. Attached to the petition was a thick exhibit stack. On top, hospital incident report, Carter, Evelyn. Next, social work note, financial refusal. Then, screenshots he recognized with a jolt. His words to Lena about not wanting to be a wallet. Lena's messages about not letting Evelyn trap him financially. His mouth went dry. He fumbled for his phone and dialed Evelyn. The call rang once, twice, straight to voicemail. He tried again, and again. Same result. A memory flickered. Evelyn in the hospital bed, her face pale, eyes steady, saying nothing while he argued with Miss Reynolds. He remembered feeling oddly triumphant when she didn't fight back. It hit differently now. Mark turned back toward the event hall, looking for Lena. Through the glass, he saw her already talking to someone else, her body angled away from him, not even glancing in his direction. The guards at the door looked politely bored and quietly alert. He checked the papers again, hunting for some line that would say this is reversible, this is a warning, not a reality. Instead, he found a bold sentence near the end. Hearing on temporary orders scheduled for date. Respondent is required to appear. Failure to do so may result in default. His heart pounded. He had come here to talk about timing and smart risks. Now, for the first time, he realized he had no idea how much time he had left before this folder turned into something he couldn't charm his way around. He stared at his reflection in the glass suit, perfect, drink still in his hand, smile gone. If this was just the petition, what else did she have that he hadn't seen yet? Several weeks after he was served, court is now in session. The bailiff's voice echoed through the courtroom, followed by the scrape of chairs and the shuffle of people settling into place. Mark Carter sat at the respondent's table, suit pressed so sharply it looked like armor. The illusion broke at his hands. They were clasped too tightly on the table, knuckles white. His attorney, a man he'd hired in a rush after being served, whispered something in his ear that didn't seem to land. Across the aisle, Evelyn sat beside Amanda Carter. She wore a simple dress, no jewelry aside from her wedding ring still on. Her posture was straight, her expression calm. There were faint shadows under her eyes, the kind all new parents carried, but there was nothing broken in her face. At the back, a carrier rested beside a trusted family friend, rocking gently with the smallest of motions. Baby Noah slept, oblivious. On the bench sat Judge Holloway, early 60s, silver hair, eyes that had seen too many people treat court like theater. He scanned the case file in front of him, then looked up. Case number 3475, Carter versus Carter, he said. We're here today on petitioner's motions for temporary orders concerning custody, support, and financial restraints. Counsel, are you ready to proceed? Amanda rose. Yes, Your Honor. Mark's attorney stood as well. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Holloway nodded. Miss Carter, you may begin. Amanda walked to the center of the courtroom, a small remote in her hand. Behind her, a screen flickered to life. This case, she said, is not at its core about wealth. It is about responsibility under pressure. She clicked the remote. A hospital logo appeared, followed by a scanned page. Exhibit A, Amanda said. Hospital incident report dated the day of the child's birth. I direct the court's attention to the section highlighted in yellow. The text zoomed in. Spouse refused to authorize payment despite explanation of options. Verbatim, quote, documented by 2 staff. Then don't. Administrative hold initiated. Social work notified. A murmur rippled through the gallery seats. Amanda continued. Exhibit B, internal social work note. It notes concern that the father refused to sign as guarantor while the mother was recovering from childbirth and that he left the hospital shortly after without resolving the matter. Next slide. Authorized access log entries from the hospital billing portal. Timestamp showing viewing of estimate, then a declined authorization. Exhibit C, Amanda said. System log confirming the respondent opened and declined the financial authorization. She paused, letting the judge process the sequence. We also submit bank statements indicating that, at the time of refusal, the respondent had sufficient funds to secure initial payment, even if doing so would have been inconvenient. Mark's attorney stood. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is speculating about my client's obligations regarding inconvenient payments. Overruled, Judge Holloway said calmly. This is a temporary orders hearing, not a criminal trial. I'm assessing patterns and risks. Continue, Miss Carter. Amanda nodded, unbothered. Exhibit D, she said, clicking again. Screenshots appeared text exchanges between Mark and Lena. Names and phone numbers redacted for public display but present in the sealed file. Don't let her trap you financially. She doesn't even work anymore. Make her show she can contribute. Don't sign everything. These messages were retrieved from a device sync that both parties had access to, Amanda said. They show that the respondent's refusal to authorize care was not a momentary oversight. It reflects a pre-existing belief that supporting his wife and newborn child financially was a trap to avoid. Mark stared at the floor. And finally, Exhibit E. Another click. Photos appeared. Mark and Lena entering and leaving a hotel 2 nights after the birth. The timestamps matched against hospital records showing early sign-out from visiting hours. Not illegal, Amanda said, without judgment. But it is context. While the hospital was flagging his refusal in their system, and while social work was attempting to ensure safe discharge conditions for a newborn, the respondent's priority was elsewhere. The room was very still now. Judge Holloway's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Amanda set the remote down. There is one more piece of information relevant to these proceedings, she said. The respondent has claimed both in correspondence and through counsel that the petitioner is financially dependent on him. That is not accurate. She approached the bench with a sealed folder, handing it to the clerk, who passed it up. Under seal, Your Honor, Amanda said. Corporate documents, escrow statements, and valuation analyses. They relate to a recent acquisition completed by the petitioner in her professional capacity. Judge Holloway opened the folder, eyes moving quickly over the pages. Corporate seals, escrow confirmations, signatures. He looked up, eyebrows raised slightly. This indicates a transaction valued at approximately $1 billion. Yes, Your Honor, Amanda replied. The deal is currently under confidentiality restrictions with regulators, which is why we've requested sealed treatment. The key point for today is this. At the time of the birth, the petitioner's financial position was significantly stronger than the respondent believed. She had the means and structure to eventually resolve medical bills herself. She let that sink in. The problem, she continued, is not that they were poor. The problem is that, when faced with his wife in recovery and a newborn child, the respondent's first instinct was to protect his own sense of control, even if it meant leaving his child's discharge in limbo. She returned to her table and sat. Judge Holloway folded his hands, turning his attention to Evelyn. Mrs. Carter, he said, voice steady. Is it true that you are the beneficial owner of the entities described in these documents? Yes, Your Honor, Evelyn replied, standing. The funds are in escrow. I did not move them at the time because of regulatory rules and because I wanted accurate documentation of my husband's choices without my interference. Mark's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client had no knowledge of this transaction. He believed his wife had no income. His decisions were based on incomplete information she chose not to share. Judge Holloway shifted his gaze to Mark. Mr. Carter, he said, did hospital staff explain that options existed: insurance, payment plans, financial assistance? Mark cleared his throat. They mentioned some things, yes. Did you understand that your refusal would delay discharge and trigger involvement from social services? I didn't think it would go that far, Mark said. Judge Holloway's expression didn't change. The law does not require your wife to disclose every asset she holds in order for you to act in good faith toward your own child, the judge said. You weren't asked to sign over your business. You were asked to accept financial responsibility as a parent. Silence. I will take a brief recess before issuing temporary orders, Judge Holloway said finally. Court is in recess for 15 minutes. The gavel fell. Conversations erupted in low whispers. The bailiff called for order even as people leaned toward each other, already spreading the version of the story they would retell later. Mark turned in his seat toward Evelyn. Evelyn, please, he whispered harshly. We can talk. This is getting out of hand. She did not look at him. Amanda leaned in, murmured something to her client. Evelyn nodded once, eyes forward. Mark's attorney tugged his sleeve. We need to discuss damage control, he said under his breath. But Mark barely heard him over the roar of the only question he could form. If this was just the temporary hearing, what did the final version of his life look like from here? Mr. Carter, please stand. The courtroom settled into a heavy silence as Mark rose. His knees felt unsteady, not from the polished floor beneath him, but from the feeling that something much larger was about to shift. Judge Holloway's voice was calm, the calm of someone who had made his decision already. Having reviewed the exhibits, heard sworn testimony, and considered the arguments of counsel, the judge began. The court finds substantial evidence of the respondent's neglectful conduct at a critical moment in his child's life. Mark stared straight ahead, throat dry. The record shows, Judge Holloway continued, that Mr. Carter had the capacity to assist with hospital bills and discharge planning, but chose not to. It further shows that he viewed his wife's and child's needs through the lens of financial leverage rather than parental responsibility. He turned a page in his notes. Accordingly, as to temporary orders pending final dissolution, the court rules as follows. First, temporary sole legal and physical custody of the minor child is awarded to the petitioner, Evelyn Carter. The respondent shall have supervised visitation at a frequency to be scheduled through the court's Family Services Department once a formal parenting plan is established. Mark's hands tightened on the back of his chair. Second, the respondent is ordered to pay temporary child support and contribute to medical expenses in an amount calculated pursuant to the statutory guidelines. A specific figure will be entered into the written order. A rustle moved through the gallery. Third, the court grants the petitioner's request for a temporary restraining order, preventing both parties, especially the respondent, from transferring, hiding, or dissipating marital assets outside the ordinary course of living and business expenses. Any unusual transfers from this point forward must be reported to the court. Mark felt his stomach drop. Fourth, in light of the evidence presented regarding hospital incident reports and the respondent's documented refusal, this court is referring the record to the appropriate prosecutorial authorities for review of potential charges related to medical neglect and financial misconduct. The court does not determine criminal liability. It does, however, have an obligation to refer concerning conduct when it intersects with the welfare of a child. The words hung in the air like a weight. Mark's knees buckled slightly. He sat down heavily, the chair scraping across the floor. Beside him, his attorney muttered, "We'll appeal the scope of the custody order," but the words sounded thin, like promises made inside a burning house. Across the aisle, Evelyn quietly gathered her papers. Judge Holloway continued, voice steady. Finally, the parties' marriage is hereby dissolved on an interlocutory basis. Property division and permanent orders will be finalized in subsequent proceedings, but the marital status is terminated effective today. A clerk's pen scratched the official record. Mark looked over at Evelyn for the first time since the ruling began. She stood now, folder in hand, head slightly bowed as Amanda said something in a low tone. Her face wasn't triumphant, it wasn't vindictive. It was finished. Mrs. Carter, Judge Holloway added. The court notes your restraint in these proceedings and your preparedness despite difficult circumstances. The court also notes that you had the capacity to pay for your child's care and ultimately did so after discharge, but that you did not interfere with how the hospital documented the respondent's refusal. That decision provided clarity to this court. Evelyn nodded once. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Holloway looked between them one last time. This matter will return to my docket for final orders, he said. Until then, these temporary orders have the full force of law. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell. The bailiff called, "All rise," as the judge left the bench. People stood, then immediately began to turn, whisper, "Move." Mark didn't move. "Evelyn," he croaked suddenly, the word tearing its way out of his throat. "Please." She paused at the aisle, folder in one hand, her other resting lightly on the handle of Noah's carrier as their family friend prepared to stand. "We can fix this," Mark said, voice shaking. "I'll pay everything, the hospital, support, whatever you want. Just don't do this to me." Several people in the gallery shifted, eyes darting between them and the bailiff. Evelyn didn't answer. "You didn't tell me about the deal," he said, louder now, desperation bleeding through. "You never told me you had money like that. How was I supposed to know?" Amanda laid a hand gently on Evelyn's arm, a silent reminder that she didn't owe him anything. Not explanations, not comfort, not a performance. Evelyn turned just enough for Mark to see her profile. He waited for anger, an accusation, some explosive line he could argue against in his head later. Instead, she gave him nothing. No words, no reaction. She adjusted her grip on the carrier handle and walked toward the doors. "Miss Us, Carter, this way please," a court officer said quietly, holding one door open for her and her small entourage. Mark lurched forward as if to follow, but a bailiff stepped slightly into his path. "Sir," the bailiff said, calm but firm, "you'll need to remain here until the hallway is clear." Mark stopped. He watched as the doors closed behind Evelyn, the small outline of Noah's carrier disappearing into the bright light of the corridor. The echo of the closing door was final in a way the gavel hadn't been. His attorney muttered something about filing motions, requesting modifications. Mark barely heard him. He had believed right up until this moment that there would be one last conversation that would undo everything. One apology, one dramatic plea, one chance. Instead, all he got was silence and the sight of her walking away without looking back. He finally understood. She hadn't come here to argue. She'd come to confirm, on paper, what had already happened the moment he said two words in a hospital room. The courthouse doors opened, not with a dramatic crash, just a firm, decisive push. Sunlight spilled across the stone steps outside as Evelyn stepped out, Noah's carrier handle wrapped firmly in her hand. The baby stirred once and then settled, the car seat canopy shading his face. A few reporters waited at the bottom of the steps, alerted by whispers about the billion-dollar wife and the hospital case. Their cameras weren't news truck large, but their eyes were sharp. "Mrs. Carter, was the ruling what you hoped for? Is it true you signed a billion-dollar deal? Do you think the system protected you today?" Evelyn didn't speed up. She didn't slow down. Her heels clicked in an even rhythm against the stone. "Miss..." Carter walked one step behind and to the side, a quiet buffer against the questions. "It's done," Amanda said softly when they reached the bottom. Evelyn looked down at Noah. His tiny chest rose and fell in the same steady rhythm the monitor had tracked days ago. Only now, there was no machine, no fluorescent light, no administrative hold. "Yes," she said, "it is." She didn't look back at the courthouse. Inside, in the cooled quiet of the now empty courtroom, Mark remained sitting for a long time, long after the clerk had gathered papers and the bailiff had relaxed at his post. The hum of the vents and the occasional creak of wood were the only sounds. His attorney eventually touched his arm. "We'll go over your options," the man said. "Appeals, modifications, compliance steps so the criminal referral doesn't become something worse." Mark barely nodded. He stared at the spot where Evelyn's chair had been, then at the door she'd walked through. The room felt larger now, but not in a good way. Like a theater after the lights came up and the audience had left. He had always thought power meant being the one everyone turned to, being the center of attention, being the provider. Now, with his name on a stack of court orders and referrals, with his access to his son reduced to supervised visits, And with the knowledge that his ex-wife had quietly built a financial life he couldn't touch, the word meant something else entirely. Power, he realized, was the ability to walk away and never need to come back to this room again. Outside, a breeze lifted a strand of hair near Evelyn's face. She tucked it back with one hand, the other still resting on the carrier handle. She paused by her car and opened the back door, clicking Noah's seat into its base with practiced care. He scrunched his face, then relaxed again as she adjusted his blanket. She leaned her forehead gently against the edge of the seat, her voice only a whisper. "I didn't destroy him," she said quietly, more to herself than to the baby. "I just stopped protecting him." She straightened, closed the door with a soft click, and walked around to the driver's side. Behind her, the courthouse loomed solid, unmovable, already receding into the background of her life. The real power, she knew now, wasn't in the building itself. It was in the record. The incident reports, the timestamps, the texts, the orders signed by a judge confirming what she'd lived through. It was in her choice to stop cushioning someone else's consequences. Inside, the last court employee turned off the overhead lights. The room dimmed. The polished wood gleamed dully, empty. Mark stood at the back now, near the doors, one hand resting against the frame. Beyond them lay a life with restrictions, supervision, and a reputation that would now always come with a silent asterisk. He thought of the hospital estimate he'd stared at, the moment he'd said, "Then don't." The feeling of control he'd had. For the first time, he understood the scale of that choice. He hadn't just refused to pay a hospital bill. He'd signaled who he really was when something real was on the line. And in doing so, he didn't just lose money. He lost access to a woman who had quietly become worth more than he'd ever imagined on paper and off. Outside, Evelyn started the engine. No music, no victory speech. Just the low hum of a car pulling away from a building she no longer needed. As she drove down the street, the courthouse shrank in the rearview mirror, replaced by open road and the small, steady sound of her son's breathing. He had refused to pay a hospital bill, and that decision cost him a marriage, a child, and a life measured in billions. I hope you enjoyed watching this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next video.